There was a secret in our marriage, a dark corner I couldn't illuminate, and it had nothing to do with perfume on a collar and everything to do with his gambling debts. But how could I have possibly known that? I'm the kind of woman who prides herself on being logical, on seeing the patterns. Yet I am also the kind of woman who hired a private investigator to spy on her own husband. It's not a title I ever thought I'd claim. It feels cheap, like a plot point in a trashy novel, but desperation has a way of stripping you of your principles, leaving you with only the raw, jagged edge of suspicion. Mark and I were supposed to be the solid ones, 15 years, a shared history that felt as foundational as bedrock. He was my partner, the steady hand on my back, the man who knew I hated cilantro and loved the smell of old books. We were a team, but over the last 6 months, the team had fractured. It began subtly, with late nights he blamed on, work crises that never seemed to yield any overtime pay. Then came the hushed phone calls he'd take on the back porch, his silhouette a tense, rigid line against the fading light. He grew distant, a stranger sleeping next to me, his body wound as tight as a spring. My mind, fueled by 1,000 movies and talk shows, went to the most obvious, painful conclusion. An affair. The thought of another woman was a sharp, clean wound. It was a betrayal I could understand, a narrative I recognized. So I did the unthinkable. I took a chunk of our savings, the money we were setting aside for that kitchen remodel, and hired a man to follow the person I thought I knew better than myself, hoping he would prove my worst fears were just that. Fears. The PI's name was Mr. Davies, a man whose beige trench coat and perpetually tired eyes seemed to be issued by some central casting agency for his profession. I'd paid him in cash, the crisp bills feeling illicit in my hands, a down payment on the destruction of my own life. For a week, I heard nothing. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart leaped into my throat. I'd check the caller ID, half hoping and half dreading it was him. In that week of silence, I watched Mark. I saw the way his eyes would dart to his phone, the way he'd flinch when I walked into the room unexpectedly. I saw the affair in every gesture. The real cost of this, the true stake, wasn't just my marriage or a new set of kitchen cabinets. It was our daughter, Lily. She was 8, all missing front teeth, and a fierce love for building elaborate Lego castles. That night, I sat on the edge of her bed, watching the gentle rise and fall of her chest as she slept, her stuffed unicorn clutched in her arms. The money I'd given Mr. Davies was supposed to be for her, for us. It was part of the college fund, the safety net, the promise of a stable future I was supposed to provide. Looking at her, so peaceful and unaware, the weight of my suspicion felt like a physical stone in my gut. What kind of home was I building for her, one held together by lies and secret investigators? The next afternoon, the email arrived. The subject line was simply, "Initial report." My hand shook so badly I could barely click it open. It wasn't a long, detailed narrative of clandestine meetings in romantic restaurants. There were no pictures of Mark kissing another woman. Instead, there were grainy photos of him standing outside a dingy sports bar downtown, the kind with blacked-out windows. There was a shot of him in a back alley, his face pale and slick with sweat, under a single bare bulb. He wasn't with a lover. He was with a man the report identified only as Silas, a thick-necked individual with a face like a clenched fist. In one photo, Mark was handing Silas a thick manila envelope, his posture not one of a man in the throes of passion, but of a man cornered and terrified. Mr. Davies' summary was blunt and devoid of emotion. No evidence of infidelity, he wrote. Subject's activities are consistent with attempts to settle significant, off-the-books financial obligations. All signs point to outstanding gambling debts. The words hung there on the screen, cold and clinical. Gambling debts. It wasn't the sharp, clean wound of an affair. It was a sickness, a rot that had been spreading through the foundations of our life without my knowledge. The secret calls, the late nights, the anxiety, it all clicked into place, forming a picture far uglier and more dangerous than I had ever imagined. My story, the one I'd been telling myself for months, just shattered. If you've ever had a moment where your entire reality shifts, you know the feeling. Stick with me on this journey. Please like and subscribe, because what I did next changed everything. For a long time, I just sat there, staring at the screen. The hum of the refrigerator felt deafeningly loud in the sudden hollow silence of my world. Gambling debts. The phrase was clinical, sterile, but it conjured images of broken kneecaps and men in dark cars. It wasn't the clean wound of infidelity. It was a cancer. I felt a strange, hollow relief, immediately followed by a tidal wave of ice-cold fear. The enemy wasn't another woman. It was a faceless, predatory world I knew nothing about. I closed the laptop, my movements stiff and robotic. The betrayal was still there, but it had morphed. Mark hadn't just lied to me, he had endangered us. He had taken the bedrock of our life and bet it on a losing hand. I was standing in the kitchen, trying to figure out how to breathe normally again, when the doorbell rang. The sound sliced through the quiet house, making me jump. I wasn't expecting anyone. Mark wasn't due home for hours, and Lily was in the backyard, her happy shrieks punctuating the afternoon as she played on the swing set. I peered through the peephole and saw a man on our porch. He was broad, thick-necked, and wore a dark polo shirt that was too tight across his chest. My blood turned to slush. It was him, Silas, the man from Mr. Davies's photos. My first instinct was to not move, to pretend no one was home. But he rang the bell again, a longer, more insistent press. Then he knocked, the sound a dull, heavy thud against the wood. It was the sound of impatience. I couldn't leave him on our doorstep. I couldn't let him think he could just stand there, a predator sniffing at the door. Taking a shaky breath, I unlocked and opened it, just a crack. "Can I help you?" My voice was thin, reedy. He didn't smile. His eyes, small and dark, scanned my face before flicking past me into the hall. "You're Mark's wife." It wasn't a question. "He's not answering his phone. We need to talk about his outstanding account." The euphemism was almost laughable. Account. He made it sound like an overdue cable bill. Before I could form a reply, Lily came skipping in from the backyard, her face flushed and her hair a mess. "Mommy, can I have a juice box? I'm so thirsty." She stopped short when she saw the man filling our doorway, her smile faltering as she instinctively pressed herself against my leg. Silas's gaze dropped to her. The shift was instantaneous. The flat, businesslike menace in his eyes softened into something else, something calculating and far more terrifying. A slow, thin smile stretched his lips. It didn't reach his eyes. "Cute kid," he said, his voice a low rumble. He looked back at me, the smile vanishing. "Things get complicated when you have a family. Mark should think about that. Tell him I stopped by. Tell him I'm tired of waiting for what's mine." He didn't wait for a response. He simply turned and walked down the path to a black sedan parked at the curb. I slammed the door, my hand flying to my mouth to stifle a sob. I fumbled with the deadbolt, my fingers trembling so hard it took 3 tries to lock it. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The secret wasn't in a grainy photograph anymore. It had a voice, it had a face, and it had just seen my daughter. I scooped Lily into my arms, her small body a warm, solid anchor in the swirling chaos of my fear. I carried her to the living room, my legs unsteady, and sat her on the sofa with the juice box she'd asked for. Her straw made a loud, slurping sound in the quiet room. She looked at me, her brow furrowed. "Who was that man, Mommy? He wasn't very nice." "Just a man with the wrong address, sweetie." I lied, the words tasting like ash. I forced a smile and turned on the TV, putting on her favorite cartoon. For the next hour, I sat beside her, my arm wrapped around her, watching bright, nonsensical characters dance across the screen. But I saw nothing. All I could see was Silas's dead-eyed gaze dropping to my daughter. Things get complicated when you have a family. It wasn't a threat, it was a promise. Once Lily was absorbed in her show, I went back to the kitchen, my movements stiff. My first thought, the one that screamed through the panic, was police. This was what they were for. A man had come to my home, implicitly threatened my family. There had to be a law against that. There had to be a system in place to protect us. With a resolve born of pure terror, I grabbed my purse and the manila envelope Mr. Davies had sent, the one containing the photos and his report. I told Lily I had to run a quick errand and would be right back, locking her in the house with a guilt that felt like another physical blow. I drove to the local police precinct, a squat brick building that was supposed to represent order and safety. Inside, the air smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. I approached the high front desk and spoke to a bored-looking officer, my voice trembling as I tried to explain the situation. He listened with a practiced patience, then pointed me toward a hard plastic chair. "Someone will be with you shortly." After 20 minutes that felt like an eternity, a different officer, whose name tag read Kowalski, called my name. He led me to a small, windowless cubicle. I sat down, my knees pressed together, and laid out the story. I told him about my suspicions, the private investigator, and the horrifying discovery of Mark's gambling debts. I pushed the photos of Mark and Silas across the desk. Finally, my voice cracking, I described Silas showing up on my porch, his words, the way he looked at Lily. Officer Kowalski picked up a photo of Silas. He looked at it, then at me, his expression unreadable. He listened to my entire story without interruption. When I finished, a hopeful silence hung in the air. I had done the right thing. I had brought the darkness into the light, to the people who could fight it. "Ma'am," he began, leaning back in his chair, which squeaked in protest, "I understand you're scared, but what exactly did this man, Silas, say?" "He said things get complicated when you have a family. He said he was tired of waiting for what's his." Kowalski steepled his fingers. "Okay, so he didn't threaten you. He didn't threaten your daughter. He didn't brandish a weapon or try to force his way into your home." "No, but the implication was clear." My voice rose, laced with a frantic edge I couldn't control. "He's a loan shark, or something worse. My husband owes him money from these gambling debts. He came to my house." "And that's not illegal," Kowalski said flatly. "Coming to your house, knocking on your door, asking for your husband, it's not a crime. As for what he said, things get complicated. Could mean anything. In a court of law, it means nothing. We can't arrest a man for speaking vaguely." He slid the photos back across the desk toward me. "This is a civil matter, ma'am. Your husband owes a debt. You need to talk to your husband." The walls of the cubicle seemed to close in. "But you don't understand," I whispered, the fight draining out of me. "These aren't normal debts. This isn't a credit card company." "I get it, but my hands are tied," he said, his tone shifting from procedural to faintly dismissive. "We can't get involved in your husband's financial arrangements. If this Silas person comes back and makes a direct, credible threat, you call us. Until then, there's no crime to investigate." I stared at him, at this uniformed embodiment of the protection I had so desperately counted on. He was offering me nothing. The system had no tools for this. The law had no language for the menace that had stood on my porch. My fear curdled into a hot, bitter frustration. I had followed the rules. I had come to the proper authorities. And I had been told in no uncertain terms that I was on my own. I was alone, with a daughter to protect and a secret that was now banging on my front door, and no one was coming to help. I walked out of the precinct into the blinding afternoon sun, clutching the manila envelope. It felt heavier now, not with evidence, but with the dead weight of my own helplessness. Officer Kowalski's words echoed in my ears. There's no crime to investigate. I had presented them with a monster, and they had shrugged, telling me it wasn't their job to look under the bed. The drive home was a blur of green lights and indifferent storefronts. The world kept spinning, oblivious. I was a castaway on a tiny, sinking island with my daughter, and I had just fired my only rescue flare to no effect. Back inside, I double-checked the deadbolt on the front door, then the lock on the back door. The house, my sanctuary, now felt like a cage, but I wasn't sure if it was meant to keep the threat out or to keep us in. Lily was still on the sofa, her juice box empty, her eyes drooping with sleepiness. I carried her upstairs to her room, tucked her in for a nap, and stood in her doorway for a long moment, watching the peaceful rhythm of her breathing. The image of Silas's face, of his eyes on her, was burned onto the back of my eyelids. I waited for Mark in the kitchen, the epicenter of our broken dreams. The silence was thick with unspoken words and uncashed checks. When I heard his key in the lock, every muscle in my body went rigid. He walked in, dropping his briefcase by the door with a weary sigh. "Hey," he said, loosening his tie. "Rough day." I didn't respond. I just stared at him, letting the silence stretch until it was taut and humming. He finally looked up, his false smile faltering as he met my gaze. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice laced with a caution he'd perfected over the last 6 months. "A man came to the house today," I said, my voice flat and cold. "His name is Silas." The blood drained from Mark's face. He looked in that moment like the man in the grainy photos, pale, cornered, and terrified. "What? What did he want?" "He wanted to talk about your outstanding account," I said, spitting the euphemism back at him. "He also saw Lily. He told me, things get complicated when you have a family." I took a breath, the frustration from the police station boiling over. "So I did what you're supposed to do, Mark. I went to the police. I showed them the pictures. I told them what he said." A flicker of hope crossed his face. "And?" "And they said there was no crime. They said it's a civil matter. They said—" I took a step closer, my voice dropping to a furious whisper, "that I should talk to my husband." Mark flinched as if I'd struck him. "Listen, I can handle this. I just need a little more time." My phone buzzed on the counter. The sound was unnaturally loud, an alien intrusion. We both stared at it. An unknown number. My hand trembled as I picked it up and unlocked the screen. It was a text message. There was a photo and a single line of text beneath it. The photo was of Lily, on our swing set. Her head was thrown back in a laugh, her pigtails flying. It was a beautiful, candid shot. And it had been taken today, from a distance, through the trees that bordered our backyard. The text read, "Cute kid." I felt the air leave my lungs in a silent scream. He had been there, watching. He hadn't just shown up at the door. He had been lurking in the woods, cataloging my life, my daughter. The threat wasn't on the doorstep anymore. It was in my phone. It had been in my yard. It was everywhere. Without a word, I turned the phone and showed it to Mark. The effect was instantaneous. The last of his composure, the last vestiges of his denial, crumbled into dust. He stumbled back, his hand coming up to his mouth, a choked, guttural sound escaping his throat. He stared at the picture of his laughing daughter, sent by the man he owed. "How much, Mark?" I whispered, the question devoid of all emotion but a hollowed-out dread. "How much is our daughter's safety worth?" He sank into a kitchen chair, his head in his hands. His voice was a muffled, broken thing. "It's all gone," he sobbed. "Everything. The kitchen money was the first to go. Then, the savings. All of it." He looked up at me, his eyes red-rimmed and pleading, and delivered the final, killing blow. "I took the money from Lily's college fund last month. It's gone too, all of it, for the gambling debts, and it's still not enough." The words hung in the air between us, more devastating than any admission of infidelity could ever have been. "It's gone too, all of it. Lily's college fund, the money I'd mentally earmarked for tuition, for dorm room supplies, for the promise of a life better and easier than ours. It hadn't been lost to a market crash or a bad investment. It had been fed, bill by bill, into the gaping maw of Mark's secret shame. I looked at my husband, crumpled in the kitchen chair, and I felt nothing. The anger was gone. The hurt was a distant echo. All that remained was a terrifying, crystalline clarity. The house was on fire, and I was the only one left who could find the way out. "How much more?" My voice was steady, devoid of inflection. It was the voice I used at work when a project was collapsing and blame was irrelevant. We were past blame. We were in the realm of damage control. Mark looked up, his face swollen and blotchy. 50,000, he choked out. "That's the final payment. He was giving me another week, but now. His eyes flicked toward my phone on the counter, toward the picture of our daughter. Now, the timeline had changed. When? I asked. Tonight, midnight. $50,000. I laughed, a short, sharp, ugly sound. We didn't have $50,000. We didn't have $5,000. We had a mortgage, 2 car payments, and a daughter sleeping peacefully upstairs, unaware that her future had been gambled away. The system had failed me. My husband had failed me. The entire foundation of my life was a lie. In that moment, standing in the kitchen we couldn't afford to remodel, I understood a profound and terrible truth. The rules I had lived by were for a different game. They didn't apply here. I walked out of the kitchen and went to the small safe we kept in the back of our closet. Inside was my grandmother's jewelry and the deed to the house. I took out a velvet box. Inside, nestled on a bed of worn silk, was a diamond necklace my grandmother had worn on her wedding day. It was the only thing of real value I owned that was mine alone. I put it in my purse. Then I grabbed the title from my car. They weren't worth $50,000, not even close, but they were something. They were an offering. When I came back downstairs, Mark was standing by the door, his car keys in his trembling hand. He looked like a man walking to his own execution. "I have to go," he whispered. "Just stay here. Lock the doors. Don't answer for anyone." "No," I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. I walked past him and opened the front door. "We're going together. You lost the right to handle this alone when you gambled with our daughter's safety. I'm not trusting her life to you anymore." I needed to see the monster for myself. I needed to look it in the eye. I wouldn't be the trembling wife hiding behind a locked door, waiting to see if her husband came home. I would be there. The drive was silent, a 20-minute trip through our quiet suburban town toward the grittier industrial side I rarely saw. Every red light felt like a reprieve, every green light a lurch closer to the abyss. Mark drove, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. I sat in the passenger seat, my purse clutched in my lap, feeling the hard edges of the jewelry box and the folded car title inside. We weren't a team anymore. I was his keeper, the grim-faced warden, escorting him to his final, terrible reckoning for his gambling debts. We pulled onto a dark, deserted street. He pointed to the alley behind the sports bar, the same one from Mr. Davies's photos, where a single, bare bulb cut a sickly yellow hole in the darkness. Mark killed the engine. The sudden silence was more terrifying than the drive had been. For a moment, we just sat there, 2 ghosts in a metal shell, staring at the alley. This was it, the end of the line. "Stay in the car," Mark said again, his voice a dry rasp. "I'm not a child, Mark," I replied, my own voice sounding strangely distant. I opened my door before he could protest further. The air was cold and smelled of damp brick and stale beer. Under the jaundiced glow of the single bulb, Silas was waiting. He wasn't alone. Another man, leaner but just as menacing, leaned against the graffiti-scarred wall, smoking a cigarette. Silas's eyes locked on me as I walked around the car to stand beside my husband. A flicker of surprise, then something akin to amusement crossed his face. "Brought the wife," he said, "not to us, but to his companion. This is a family affair now." Mark stumbled forward, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Silas, please. I have something. It's not all of it, but it's a start." I stepped past him, my heart a cold, hard stone in my chest. I opened my purse and pulled out the velvet box and the folded card title. I held them out. "This is a diamond necklace. It's worth at least $10,000. The title is from my car. That's another $15,000. It's a down payment. We will get you the rest." Silas didn't even look at my offering. He looked at me, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his lips. It was the same smile he'd had on my porch. "You think this is a negotiation? You think you can pawn Grandma's jewelry to fix this?" He chuckled, a low, guttural sound. "Your husband is a little more enterprising than you think. This isn't just about a few bad hands of poker." He took a step closer, invading my space, his gaze dropping to Mark, who was visibly trembling. "This 50 grand isn't the debt," Silas said, his voice a low, confidential poison. "It's the price to keep his picture off the evening news." The world tilted. It wasn't making sense. Evening news? My mind raced, trying to connect the pieces. It was then that the second email from Mr. Davies, the one that had arrived an hour before Mark came home, blazed in my memory. After the police had turned me away, I'd called him, my voice tight with a fury born of helplessness. "Keep digging," I'd told him. "I don't care what it costs. Find me something I can use." He had. Oh God, he had. "It was never about the gambling debts, was it?" I said, my voice quiet but carrying in the dead air of the alley. Mark's head snapped up, his eyes wide with a new, more profound terror. Silas stopped smiling. "The gambling debts were just the excuse," I continued, the PI's blunt, factual words echoing in my head. "The real problem is the $250,000 you embezzled from your firm, isn't it, Mark? The money you started stealing 6 months ago. The gambling wasn't the disease. It was a stupid, desperate symptom. You were trying to win it back before the quarterly audit, which is next week." The confession was in the absolute collapse of my husband's face. He looked at me as if I had just plunged a knife into his chest. Silas's expression had gone from amused to stone cold. The pieces clicked into their final horrifying place. He wasn't a loan shark, he was a blackmailer. "How do you know that?" Silas hissed, taking a step toward me. The payoff, the one card I had to play, the skill I'd paid for in a moment of marital suspicion, had become the only weapon I possessed. "I hired a man to follow my husband," I said, meeting his gaze without flinching. "When you threatened my daughter, I had him dig deeper. He's very thorough. He found the wire transfers from the company accounts to the offshore betting site. He has copies. He has everything." I took a breath. "Right now, all that information is sitting in a dead man's switch on his server. If I don't check in with him in the next hour, he sends it all to the district attorney, the SEC, and the senior partners at Mark's firm. You hurt us, you walk away from us, you even look at my house again, and it all goes public." Silas stared at me, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. He knew I was telling the truth. The bluff was too specific, too detailed to be anything but real. "You're crazy," he spat. "Your husband goes to prison. You lose everything." "He's already lost everything," I said, my voice breaking for the first time. "He lost it the moment he stole that first dollar. You think I care about this house? About this money? You came for my daughter. Now, you get nothing. Mark goes to jail, and your cash cow is gone forever. Or," I said, pushing my advantage, "I liquidate everything we own, the house, the cars, our retirement. I will give you every last cent, and you will disappear. You will delete the picture of my daughter, and we will never ever see you again." The alley was silent except for the sound of Mark's ragged, sobbing breaths. Silas looked from my face to Mark's broken form, then back to me. He saw the truth in my eyes. He saw a woman who had already lost her whole world and had absolutely nothing left to lose. He was a predator, but he was also a businessman, and I had just turned his sure-thing investment into a catastrophic risk. The choice hung in the air, thick and heavy as the stench of stale beer. Silas's face was a canvas of warring emotions, fury at being outmaneuvered, grudging respect for the sheer audacity of my play, and the cold calculation of a businessman cutting his losses. He glanced at Mark, a pathetic sobbing heap who was no longer an asset but a liability. Then his eyes, hard as river stones, came back to me. "You'll get a single text message," he said, his voice clipped and low. "It will have an account number. You have 72 hours to wire everything. If it's $1 short, if I hear so much as a whisper of this from anyone, the deal is off, and I won't need pictures to ruin you." He didn't wait for a reply. He gave a sharp nod to his silent partner, who pushed himself off the wall. They turned and melted back into the deeper shadows of the alley, their footsteps echoing for a moment before vanishing completely. The black sedan at the end of the street started its engine and pulled away without its headlights on, and then we were alone. The alley felt impossibly quiet. The single bulb above us hummed. I stood there, my purse still open, the velvet box a useless prop in my hand. My legs began to shake, a violent, uncontrollable tremor. The adrenaline that had turned my spine to steel was gone, leaving behind a hollow, vibrating weakness. I leaned against the cold brick wall to keep from collapsing. Mark hadn't moved. He was still on his knees, his face buried in his hands. The sound of his weeping was the only thing real in the sudden, terrifying vacuum. He had gambled with our lives, not just with our money. The gambling debts were a lie to cover a felony. He had embezzled $250,000. He was a criminal. He was the stranger I had married. I didn't help him up. I didn't say a word. I walked back to the car, got into the passenger seat, and shut the door. A few minutes later, he stumbled into the driver's seat, his face pale and slick with tears in the dim glow of the dashboard lights. The drive home was a silent wake. The moment we were inside the house, I locked the deadbolt and went straight to the kitchen phone. Mark stood in the entryway, watching me as if I were a stranger, which, I suppose, I was. I was no longer the woman who cried over the thought of an affair. I was the woman who had just negotiated with a blackmailer in a dark alley. I didn't call 911. This wasn't a screaming emergency. It was a cold, calculated move. I dialed the precinct's non-emergency number, the same one I'd found on the internet earlier that day. Newton Police Department. How may I direct your call? A calm voice answered. I need to speak with a detective, I said, my voice steady. I have evidence pertaining to an active case of felony extortion. There was a pause. Ma'am, do you have a case number? No, I said, because when I came in this afternoon to report the threat, Officer Kowalski told me it was a civil matter and that there was no crime to investigate. He was wrong. The crime is extortion. The target is my husband, Mark. The perpetrator's name is Silas, and I have digital proof of the crime he is using as leverage. The silence on the other end of the line was different this time. It wasn't dismissive. It was attentive. Please hold, ma'am. I held, my knuckles white on the receiver. Mark was staring at me, his mouth slightly agape. The hope that had flickered in his eyes at the police station earlier was gone, replaced by the dawning horror of comprehension. I wasn't calling to save him. I was calling to end this. A new voice came on the line, deeper and more serious. This is Detective Miller. I understand you have information about an extortion case? Yes, I said. I took a breath and laid it all out, not with the frantic fear of my first attempt, but with the cold precision of a CEO delivering a brutal quarterly report. I told him about Silas, the visit, the text message with my daughter's picture, and then I gave him the payload. The leverage being used is my husband's embezzlement from his firm. The blackmailer is demanding payment to conceal the crime. I have retained a private investigator who has acquired the electronic trail of the original crime. That evidence is currently on a server. I can provide you with everything. I have followed the rules and the system had failed me, so I had broken the rules, gathered my own intelligence, and now I was bringing it back to them on a platter. I was no longer asking for their help. I was telling them how to do their job. Ma'am, Detective Miller said, his voice tight with an energy Kowalski's had completely lacked. Do not transfer any money. Do not have any further contact with this, Silas. Where are you now? I'm at my home. Stay there. Lock your doors. I'm sending a patrol car to sit outside your house right now. I'll be there myself in 20 minutes. I hung up the phone. The click of the receiver echoed in the silent kitchen. I looked at Mark, at the ruins of the man I had loved for 15 years. The system was finally working. A police car would be here any minute. Protection was on its way. But it wasn't coming to save our marriage. It was coming to collect the evidence that would send my husband to prison. The 20 minutes it took for Detective Miller to arrive were the longest of my life. Mark and I didn't speak. He remained by the entryway, a statue of a broken man, while I stood in the kitchen, my hand still resting on the phone. The house was a tomb, holding 15 years of memories that had all just been reclassified as lies. When the strobing red and blue lights of the patrol car washed silently through the kitchen window, painting the cabinets in fleeting flashes of emergency. Neither of us flinched. The emergency had been living with us for months. This was just the cleanup crew. Detective Miller was the opposite of Kowalski. He was sharp, focused, his eyes missing nothing. He didn't ask me to repeat my story. He said, "Let's start with the proof." I slid the manila envelope across the kitchen table, the same envelope that had once held photos of Mark and Silas, evidence of the gambling debts I had so naively feared. Now it held so much more. It held the digital forensics from Mr. Davies, the tracked wire transfers, the timeline of the embezzlement. It was the complete and unabridged history of my husband's self-destruction. As Miller reviewed the documents, another detective spoke quietly with Mark in the living room. I couldn't hear the words, only the low, gentle murmur of the detective's voice and the raw, ragged sound of Mark's confession, punctuated by sobs. I felt nothing. It was the most terrifying thing of all. My heart, which had been hammering against my ribs for days, was now unnervingly still. I had been hollowed out, scraped clean of love, of anger, of everything but a grim, functional resolve. This was a procedure now, a transaction. I had traded my husband for my daughter's safety. When they led Mark out, his hands cuffed behind his back, he stopped in the doorway and looked at me. His face was a wreck of tears and disbelief. He was searching my eyes for something, a flicker of the woman who had loved him, a sign of regret, a promise of forgiveness. He found nothing. I was a stranger to him now, a stone-faced woman who had made a choice. He had placed his bets, and I had just called his bluff. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal formalities and sleepless nights. The world I had known was dismantled piece by piece. Lawyers called. The bank called. Mark's firm called, their voices a mixture of shock and professional sympathy. I moved through it all like a ghost, signing papers, answering questions. My voice, a monotone. I put the house on the market. I sold the cars. I liquidated everything, just as I'd promised Silas I would. But instead of wiring it to his anonymous account, I deposited it into an escrow account for restitution. The real payment came at night. Sleep offered no escape, only a different kind of torment. I didn't dream of Silas or dark alleys. I dreamt of our wedding photos, but Mark's face was blurred out, a smudge of gray. I dreamt I was trying to fill Lily's college fund jar, but the coins I dropped in turned to dust. The nights were the worst. In the crushing silence of the house, every creak of the floorboards was Silas on the stairs. Every shadow in the corner was a threat. I'd wake up gasping, my heart pounding, and creep into Lily's room just to watch her breathe, assuring myself the flashing lights I saw behind my eyelids weren't real. The PI, Mr. Davies, had become a specter in my life. His final invoice sat on my desk, a stark reminder of the skill I had deployed. I had hired him to find a simple, painful truth, and in the end he had delivered an unbearable one. His efficiency, his emotionless reports, had given me the weapon I needed, but wielding it had poisoned me. I looked at the neatly printed invoice and felt a wave of nausea. I had paid a man to document the end of my world. The initial lie, the one about the gambling debts, felt almost innocent in retrospect. It was a problem I thought I could understand. But the truth he'd unearthed was a malignancy. My logical mind, my pride in seeing patterns, had led me here. I had followed the thread and unraveled everything. I was safe. Lily was safe. But I was the one who had set the charge and lit the fuse. And I was the only one left to live in the rubble. One morning, 2 months after Mark's arrest, I was taping up the last box from Lily's room. Her unicorn drawings, her Lego creations, her entire childhood packed away into brown cardboard. My own life felt just as boxed up, sealed, and ready for a destination I couldn't yet picture. On the bare floor lay a single piece of paper I hadn't been able to pack. Mr. Davies's final invoice, paid in full. Seeing his name, I didn't feel the nausea anymore. I felt a cold, hard clarity. There was one last piece of business to attend to, one last debt to be settled. I drove to the Newton Police Precinct. It was the same squat brick building, but I was not the same woman who had fled from it in a state of helpless terror. I walked through the same doors, smelled the same stale coffee, but this time my hands were steady. My heart was calm. I approached the high front desk where a new officer sat, looking just as bored as the first one. "I need to speak with Officer Kowalski," I said. My voice was even. It held no plea. The officer looked up, surprised by my tone. "Is he expecting you?" "No," I said, "but he'll want to see me. Tell him it's the woman with the civil matter from a couple of months ago, the one with the gambling debts." I sat in the same hard plastic chair and waited. A few minutes later, Kowalski appeared. He had the same tired, dismissive air about him. He clearly didn't recognize me at first. He saw a composed woman in a blazer, not the frantic, trembling mess he had brushed off weeks ago. "Ma'am, you asked for me?" I stood up. "Yes, I came to you for help. I told you a man had come to my home, that he had seen my daughter, that he had made a threat about what happens when you have a family." A flicker of recognition crossed his face, followed immediately by a look of wary impatience. "Right, I remember. I told you, unless there's a direct—" "I know what you told me," I interrupted, my voice dangerously quiet. "You told me it wasn't a crime. You told me it was a civil matter. You told me to go home and talk to my husband. I'm here today to give you the official follow-up you never asked for." I took a step closer, and he instinctively took a step back. That civil matter was a case of felony extortion. The man, Silas, was a blackmailer. The leverage he was using wasn't my husband's gambling debts. That was the lie you were content to swallow. It was the $250,000 my husband embezzled from his company. The day you sent me away, that man was in the woods behind my house, taking pictures of my 8-year-old daughter. Kowalski's face had gone pale. His mouth opened, but no words came out. "When you told me there was no crime to investigate," I continued, pressing the point home like a thumb on a bruise, "you left me and my child alone with him. You, in this uniform representing this system, told me my fear was incredible. So I had to do your job. I had to gather the evidence. I had to confront the blackmailer myself in a dark alley. I had to make the choice to turn in my own husband to save my daughter's life." I pulled a small card from my pocket and held it out. "This is Detective Miller's card. And this," I pointed to the number I had written on it, "is the case number for the ongoing investigation. The one you said couldn't exist. I don't need you to do anything now. It's already done. I just wanted you to look me in the eye and understand what happens when you dismiss a woman's fear. I want you to think of my face and my daughter's face the next time someone comes to you terrified, and you decide it's easier to label it a domestic issue than to do the actual work of policing." He stared at the card, then at my face. The bored condescension was gone, replaced by a dawning, sickening comprehension. He looked, for the first time, like a man who understood he had failed at the only thing he was supposed to do. He started, his voice a croak. "I didn't know." "No," I said, pulling the card back. "You didn't look." I turned and walked away, my footsteps echoing in the quiet lobby. I didn't look back. There was no victory in it, no satisfaction. But it wasn't about revenge. It was about forcing an audit. I had presented the system with its own failure, documented and undeniable. I left him standing there, a uniformed ghost in a building meant to stand for safety, now haunted by the knowledge of the one time he had assured a citizen she was on her own, and she had believed him. 4 months. 122 days since I watched a police car carry my husband, and the life I knew away into the night. We live in an apartment now, on the other side of town. It's small, with walls that feel too close, but it's clean and it's quiet and it's ours. The old house sold quickly, its equity vanishing into the black hole of legal fees and the restitution fund I had established. There are no woods behind our new building, just a parking lot and the brick wall of the neighboring complex. I can see every car that comes and goes. I like it that way. Lily and I have new routines. We walk to the park on Tuesdays, we get pizza on Fridays, we go to the library on Saturdays. We are building a new life out of small, predictable pieces. I see a therapist on Thursdays. Her name is Dr. Anya, and she has kind eyes and doesn't offer easy platitudes. In our sessions, I talk about the nights I still wake up, my heart racing, convinced I hear a footstep in the hall. I talk about the anger that sometimes rises in my throat, hot and swift, when I see a happy couple holding hands. We talk about the strange, hollow guilt of being the one who brought the whole rotten structure down. She calls it survival. I'm still learning to believe her. The kitchen in our apartment is a narrow galley, a shadow of the open concept dream I once had. But last week, I took a small portion of my first paycheck from my new job, and I bought a beautiful, cherry red stand mixer. It sits on the counter, a defiant splash of color in our beige, temporary world. It's not a full remodel, but it's a start. It's a promise to myself that we will have nice things again, things bought with my own money, things that are not tainted. This afternoon, while Lily sat at the small dinette table, carefully drawing a new family portrait, just the two of us and our cat, I decided to use it. I was scrolling through a recipe for cookies on my laptop when a notification popped up. A news alert. A local CEO indicted for fraud. I clicked on it. The article was dense with financial jargon, but I understood it. I understood the language of hidden accounts, of digital trails, of a life built on a lie. I understood it because I had lived it. My mind went back, as it so often did, to the beginning, to the lie that started it all, the simple, almost quaint-sounding excuse of the gambling debts. I thought of Mr. Davies. For months, his name had been a knot of complicated feelings in my gut. He was the tool I had used to demolish my own life. But sitting there, in my own kitchen, with the hum of my own mixer in the background, I saw it differently. The skill I had found wasn't just in hiring him. It was in the act of looking. It was the refusal to accept the easy lie. It was the part of me that, even when I was terrified and heartbroken, knew there was a pattern I wasn't seeing and had to find it. I typed his name into my email search bar. The threads appeared, a digital timeline of my descent and transformation, the initial report, the grainy photos, the final, terrible truth about the embezzlement, the paid invoice. I opened the last email, the one containing the server information I'd used to save us. I read his last line, evidence provided as requested. Please let me know if further services are required. I stared at it for a long time. Then, with a slow, deliberate click, I selected the entire conversation and moved it to the trash. I clicked again, emptying it permanently. I would not require his services again. I didn't need to pay someone to find the truth for me anymore. I had learned to look for myself. And I knew, with a certainty that was both terrifying and liberating, that I would never stop looking again. I closed the laptop. "Mommy," Lily said, holding up her drawing, "I made the sun extra bright." I looked at the waxy yellow star she had drawn over our two smiling stick figures. "It's beautiful, sweetie," I said, my voice thick. "It's perfect." I stood up and went to the counter, scooping flour into the shiny red bowl. It was time to make cookies. I scooped the first ball of dough onto the baking sheet. The motion was simple, repetitive, grounding. Beside me, Lily hummed the tune from her favorite cartoon, occasionally sticking a finger into the brown sugar for a quick taste. The cherry red mixer whirred softly as it beat the next batch. This was our new symphony. No more whispered phone calls, no more forced silences, no more lies sucking the air out of the room. Just the sweet, mundane sounds of a life being lived. A year ago, I was a different woman in a different kitchen. I was a woman consumed by a narrative of betrayal, so certain the secret in my marriage was another woman. The truth, when it came in that clinical report from Mr. Davies, felt so much uglier. The gambling debts, the secret life, the sickness that had been rotting the foundations of our home. It was a horror story I couldn't have written, but it was the story I had to live. I had to walk through the fire of it. From the moment Silas appeared on my doorstep to the moment I looked Officer Kowalski in the eye and showed him the cost of his indifference. I thought the skill I'd paid for was investigation, the simple act of hiring a man to find a secret. I was wrong. The skill I learned was excavation. I learned how to dig, how to sift through the rubble of my life, find the one hard, solid piece of truth, and hold on to it, no matter how much it cut my hands. I learned that the systems you trust will not always protect you, and that the rules you live by are sometimes useless. I learned that the only person you can truly count on to save you is yourself. It's a brutal lesson, but a powerful one. "Is it ready yet, Mommy?" Lily asked, peering over the counter at the cookie dough. "Almost, sweetie," I said, sliding the first tray into the preheated oven. I looked at her, her face smudged with flour, her eyes bright and clear. She was safe. She was happy. All the loss, all the fear, all the nights I spent staring at the ceiling, it was all worth it for this. For this simple, peaceful afternoon. We had lost everything, but we had saved each other. I never thought I'd be this person, a single mother in a small apartment, rebuilding from scratch. But I'm also a woman who faced down a blackmailer, a woman who forced the system to listen, a woman who learned that her own logic, her own refusal to accept a lie, was the most powerful weapon she ever had. I'm not just a survivor, I'm the architect of my own peace. It's a story I never wanted to tell, but it's mine. Thank you for listening to it, for sticking with me on this journey. It means more than you know. If you found any strength in my story, please like and subscribe.